What's up, guys? It's me, Pez Flips, and today I have a topic that I've talked about once before, but I think I might have different thoughts about it, and that is having a collection getting in the way of improving as a flipper. I think there's a lot of depth here, and I think part of it has to do with at what stage are you in your flipping. So when I was just getting into the hobby and I was in my first year or so, I was out there trying to explore as many different material types, balance profiles, weight configurations, etc. And while I was doing that, I learned a lot about how to do different tricks because obviously different balances make different tricks easier. And I think when it's easier to do a trick, you get the feeling for it, and then when you move to a different balance, it's easier to pick up that trick after the fact. So when you're first learning, you're learning a lot about just how a balisong moves, period. So by trying different things, having a larger collection, you do get to experience a lot, develop your taste, and learn some of the foundational tricks a little bit easier. I think there is a point, however, once you become experienced enough, and I'm not trying to sit here, toot my horn, and say I'm like some top-tier flipper, but I do believe that, I'm continuing to learn and continuing to progress my abilities, and I've gotten to this point where even with a limited collection like I have, which I know people will be, some people are like, wow, you have a great collection. I'm not trying to say it's bad. I'm just saying the number of balis is, compared to some other people on the smaller end, I only have like 5 or 6 balis that I really have in my rotation. I have a couple lent out to people, but like I have my Gaboon, the static rep, which I'm still down to sell if anyone wants to pick it up, and the Frankenforge Ion, the Slight, and Kraken clone, and a Tsunami clone. And what I have found with those guys is that, I've kind of slowly worked into having balances that are somewhat similar to each other, but there will be times where I pick up a knife. I think the Slight is a good example of this. And I'll pick up the Slight and it'll feel just wrong. It'll feel weird. And it's because I've been flipping something like the Tsunami clone, right? And that has just a little bit more of a, it has a less blade prominence, the Tsunami, and a little bit less mass behind like the end of the handles. So that's that difference that when I'm flipping it to begin with, it feels clunky, and it actually makes it harder to flip sometimes. So when I have a bunch of different knives, what I've found recently is that if I spend like a week with one knife, it slowly becomes my favorite knife. And that's because I'm familiar with how it performs and when I'm trying to be smooth. Because in some ways, smoothness is not, to accomplish smoothness is to not fight the balisong. You're trying to lead the balisong where it wants to go instead of trying to force it to go where it needs to go. And to achieve that smoothness, you have to have an understanding, a picture of how your knife will move in concordance with whatever motion you're trying to do. So, like I said, when I spend more time with those balisongs, I find myself better at being smooth with them and liking them more, which begs the question, why have a large collection? This kind of goes back with some people talking about maining a balisong, and I do believe that maining a balisong is the best way to improve, and that is because, and this is for people who have gotten past like a lot of the fundamentals of fanning, rollovers, and ladders. Once you kind of have like those pivotal things, maybe like some cherry pickers or inverse cherry pickers, stuff like that. Once you have those fundamentals down, if you have a balisong that you like, I think it's totally fine to have like a beater and a safe queen version of it if you really wanted to. But I also think that beaters are nice because then you feel like you can flip them wherever. But having a main allows you to build so much more comfort and familiarity to where learning new tricks, I would argue, and it's, this is just my opinion, that it is easier. People can go back and say, well, the variety of the balances, it helps you understand more what the differences feel like, and I think that's totally fine. But again, that's under the context of somebody who is on the newer end of flipping. I think as you progress into intermediate level, like low, mid, maybe high intermediate, I think you kind of, if you're serious about learning, you should try to find your competitive flipper, the one that you want to stick with. And that's for one limited goal, because ultimately balisong flipping isn't essentially only about getting really, really good. And even though that's something that I find really cool, I also just like the novelty of having different balisongs. I cannot deny that. Having a big collection, being able to like spice up flipping here and there, it does help. And you could make the argument that having different balisongs keeps the hobby a little bit more fresh. It allows you to mess around with new tricks and stuff while not feeling like you're kind of stuck. I don't know. Having different balisongs, it gives that variety that you need. I think that's why there's always going to be a market for buying new designs, because part of it is, new designs look cool. We shop with our eyes first, but also that I think there's something really neat about how a balisong's design visually contributes to how it performs. By having a large collection, I think if we're talking about like the 1% improvement, it would get in the way of that. But, people aren't here to exclusively become the best flippers, right? So, obviously nothing is black and white. So when I say like, oh, you should main a balisong, that's under the context that you are trying to improve as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And obviously that's going to be different for different people. And I advocate for taking any skill development at a pace that you feel comfortable, because ultimately, you got a lot of other crap going on in your life that is probably a little bigger than flipping knives. So I think having a little collection in the grand scheme of things is totally fine. And I don't know if it'll make a huge difference, but it's one of those things where I think, honestly, if you do have a collection, maybe try to spend like at least a minimum of a couple of days with only one balisong at a time, just to like practice that exercise where you're like, okay, well, this week I'm only going to be using, this guy, right? This week I'm only going to be using this guy. And I think what I've found is when I do commit to doing that, I feel way more comfortable with whatever it is I'm flipping. But yeah, that kind of sums it up for this video. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about this. I am just giving my opinion. I'm just some guy, right? So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on the topic. I'd also be interested to see if you guys have big collections. Feel free to drop your number in the comments, because I've heard some crazy numbers, upwards of like the 40s and 50s, and that is absurd, because how are you able to flip some of those guys in that collection? But, we are, just basically like animals, right? And we're just like crows. Crows like to collect shiny things, and I think that we're not much different than crows in that regard sometimes. But yeah, it's been Pez Flips. Thank you for watching, as always. If you have another video idea, please leave it in the comments. I like having an open discussion with you guys, because that's what makes this fun. So yeah, Pez Flips. See you guys later. Have a good day.